The wall might be a little slower than the clock on the screen. Sorry. Take your Bibles and turn to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6. We're going to start in verse 19. We're in the middle of our study on the Sermon on the Mount. We've taken an entire quarter to look at this incredible sermon that Jesus gave. And throughout this entire quarter, we have emphasized the importance of not looking at this text with how other people are applying it to their lives, whether it be people outside this building or how people in this building are applying it to their lives. But our whole focus this quarter has been how each one of us individually is applying this to their life, their teaching. It's an amazing, amazing sermon. And so I hope all of you have been amazed by Jesus as we've been reading it and studying it together. Let's go ahead and bow for a word of prayer. God, we're so thankful that you love us, that you care for us, and we are so grateful for Jesus, who loves us so much that he was willing to praise you and bless you even in a time right before his death, knowing that his death was going to result in our salvation. We thank you for him. We thank you for the sermon that he delivered and all the teaching that he gave on this earth, and how you saw fit to let us read it and let us study it and let us have these wonderful, amazing words of our Savior so that we know how we need to live our life in a way that not only honors you and brings you glory while we live it, but also it is the most fulfilling and best way for us to live our lives. So we're just so grateful for all that you do for us. Through Jesus we pray. Amen. All right, so we are looking at Matthew chapter 6. Let's just read. I always forget to get that remote. I got one. There's one up here, Herb. I'll get it. Mine works too. Yours probably works better. All right, so the first couple verses we'll read together. Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19, says this: "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." I think Jesus is really carrying on with the same reasoning that he's been using throughout this entire text. And that is, don't split your allegiance. You have one person to give your allegiance to. When you're praying, you need to focus on God listening to you. When you're giving alms, your only focus needs to be on God being happy with your alms giving. When you're praying, he's the one you're praying to. When you're fasting, he's the one that you should be seeing. And so when he comes to this particular passage, he uses sort of another illustration to teach us that we can't have divided loyalties. You can't be looking for the praise of man and expect to get the praise of God. Here he says you can't be spending all of your time and energy storing up for yourselves treasures on earth and also expect to be able to have treasures in heaven. You have to be able to know where your treasure really should be stored. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to look over the questions and answer those. We do have 2 microphones that will be running around, so you can raise your hand if you want to answer a question. I ask that you speak loudly, directly into the microphone, so all of us can hear you, and the people who are watching online or those who might listen to this even next year or the year after will be able to hear your wonderful comments that you are about to share with us. So our first question is, why shouldn't you lay up treasures on earth? And can you give an example of something that at one point in your life you treasured it? I mean, it was the most important thing you've ever had in your entire life, and you were just so excited to get it, and before long it just wore out, and you realized, you know what? I probably put a little bit too much emphasis on that particular thing. So anybody want to share an idea with us? You can raise your hand. All right, Jason has one, so you don't have to pass the microphone very long. Go ahead, Jason.
When I was younger, I always wanted a video game system. From Odyssey 2 back when I was this big, to the original PlayStation, to Sega Genesis, then the original PlayStation. Every one of those is sitting in a closet, unused.
All right.
But I wanted those, and I was so excited about them, and it was going to be the be-all and end, especially when I was little, if I had them. But then you realize the ephemeral nature of it, the fleeting pleasure of playing the games. I mean, after a while, it was just not fun anymore. I think it comes down to actually what you were talking about in your Lord's Supper talk, is having that right frame of mind. I know you and I talked briefly about blessing the bread and, versus blessing and praising God. And when we focus on the bread, it's like we've made the bread a talisman. We've made the bread some kind of idol, some kind of symbol, instead of focusing on what we're doing by partaking of that bread, and that is praising God for his Son, and we are reaffirming our commitment to the covenant that we have with him. And so when we lay up treasures on earth, we're no longer focused on God. We're no longer focused on the covenant that he's made with us. And we direct our energy and attention to that treasure, or to getting more of that treasure, and no longer pay attention to God. I think that's the big draw. Is if I think being a Christian is hard enough, and if you're not laser focused on it, it only becomes that much more difficult.
Yeah, very good. So Jason's particular example was game systems that he had when he was younger. And I think this point, we have a tendency of laying it on the kids, right? You joke about the kids, you buy them something, and within 2 weeks, they don't even want to use it anymore. But I think we also fall in that same category, where we hold physical possessions up to a level that is beyond what God wants us to hold them up to. Brian?
Yeah, and I think in our culture, we're especially tempted to lay up treasures that we cannot afford on the earth. And I guess I could think of an example of this. I bought a vehicle, a convertible Nissan 370Z, that actually did not lose its value at all. I still love it. But I could not afford it because I bought almost the entire thing on credit. My credit score was amazing, so they just gave me whatever I wanted. But then the stress of that, not being able to I could make the payments, but it was just stressful and like crowding out every other thing in my budget that was actually more important to me than the car. It's just I had to crowd it out to afford the car. So that was very sobering to realize I can't even focus on God because I'm just so stressed. It was hard to sleep. And so graciously, one of our elders bought it from me. So. And he still lets me drive it whenever I want to.
All right. That had a very good ending for you. So you have, sometimes we have possessions and we think they're our treasure, but they're really holding us captive to them. So I think that's a good reason why not to put your treasures on earth, because it's a lie, right? They're not really a treasure. It's not really valuable. In the text, all of our earthly treasures decay, right? Anybody ever have something stolen from you? That's just a terrible feeling. Somebody comes in, something that you've worked for, you bought, you think it's a wonderful thing, and they come in and they just take it from you. I mean, like that, it's gone. And it's just a terrible, terrible thought, and you feel so awful about that. Rust, we can't move from Indiana, and I have two cars right now that they're just rusted out. I mean, they're just totally rusted out. One is not safe to drive, the mechanic told me. Don't drive this anymore. It's too rusty. But I bought it used, and I only paid $1,500 for it. But somebody bought that car brand new and thought it was the greatest thing in the world. It had, the power, everything, and it was the greatest thing. And it's going to end up in a junkyard. That's where it's going to end up. I'm going to drive it, if it's still running, straight to the junkyard, and hopefully they'll give me $500 for it, and that'll be the end of that car. 2 houses that I've lived in my life are no longer in existence. And so things of this earth are so temporary, it's hard to believe. I remember my dad used to drive us around Alabama whenever we go visit. Well, see about that big oak tree? There used to be a house there, and that was the house I was raised in. So you think about that. A lot of our houses that we were even raised in have been gone and been, leveled. So those things are all so temporary. Jared?
This kind of speaks to the temporary thing that you're talking about. I got my first job, my first real career job, and saved up for a year and put half down on a 2003 red Tacoma. It was beautiful, and I loved that truck, and I really planned on driving it for the rest of my life. It was real reliable, never ever had a trouble with it. Well, I got broadsided by a red light runner in 2020, and it totaled it. But I was injured in the accident. I got herniated discs. And then Brock was with me, and he got hurt a little bit, but not injured. But at that point, it put it in perspective. First, that things don't last forever. And compared to the injury that I got, or the idea of my son being hurt, the truck was completely unimportant. And then I replaced it the next week with another one. So there you go. That also kind of reminds me, so I've kind of been meaning to bring this up. I haven't had a lot of, I've just been waiting for the opportunity. I go to estate sales all the time. It's mine and my son Brock's hobby. We go to estate sales, and there are dozens of people walking through these people's property, picking over their stuff that they accumulated through their whole lives. And these are things people treasured, and now there's just people bargaining with the estate sale company. Oh, well, will you take $20 for it? No, I'll have to get 30. That's your life's treasures there being picked over by strangers. And
Yeah,
it puts it in perspective, how important was that stuff really?
That's a really good point. Okay, we have a whole bunch of hands up, so we might have to limit how many we can let talk on this one. But go ahead, leave your hands up. I think somebody has a microphone. But yeah, when my dad passed away, that hit me so hard, because we're walking through all the stuff that he had and that he had bought, he had saved, all this good stuff, and nobody wanted it. I mean, my office has a hall tree in it, and it has an old antique chair, and I have 2 antique chairs in the shed out there. I don't have any place to put them. And so, I mean, these were things that I just hated for them to, it was that same feeling, these were important to my dad. I hate for them to just, somebody offer $5 for it and be going away. So Shelley's like, just let it go for $5. It is, that really hit me. I remember multiple times as I'm walking around my dad's property and looking at stuff thinking, how fast do we get rid of somebody's stuff? It's like that. We were just hauling load after load to Goodwill, and then having all the neighbors and family, anything you guys want, come get it. And it was just a sense of, boy, this really is not worth very much at all. All right, somebody has, Chris?
Yeah, somewhere in there, you guys reminded me that we can get into intangible things too, and I would never think badly about anyone who wanted to become educated, but I would say that I know I have friends who, invested in going to school and went into a lot of debt, and it's all in that thing we do when we're younger to try and meet the status quo. We want to become somebody. And sometimes it's about a career, but sometimes it's more than that. And sometimes you're trying to meet sort of the social expectation. And then, for example, you might graduate and there be a recession, or you may not have the last $1,000 you need to get your degree or whatever it is. And I have a friend I'm thinking of right now who that money never served him $1. And I know a few actually. And that was a hard lesson for them, that it was either they weren't chasing it for the right reasons, or if not that, you might do something for the right reasons and it may never serve you. It's just how it is.
Yeah, and so not just money itself, but just the pursuit of education sometimes can fall in the same category. I think John had one, and then we have 2 on this row here. Go ahead.
Along the lines of intangible things, I think sometimes we can very often put relationships, even family, before God as a matter of importance in our life and what we dedicate to.
And even those relationships, although they might last our entire life, we hope they do, they're still temporary compared to our relationship, our eternal relationship with God. Even there's no marriage even in heaven.
Like, I think that everything has with time being our most valuable asset, everything takes up time in your mind, right? So if you buy stuff or have stuff, there's a care associated with that, right? There's time to take care of that and protect that, or whatever you think is so important. And I think that can take a lot out of you. I've had stuff that I realized, man, this is so much to take care of. I don't have time to deal with this. I had to sell it, right? Because I can't deal. I only have so much time in the day, and I'm trying to put God first, and all my time's consumed with this or that. So that's something to really keep in mind.
Yeah, so sometimes your earthly possessions can not only not last, but then they rob you of the time to spend on the important things in life, right? Yes, brother.
Yeah, a lot of things have been covered. I put my hand up, but Very much so. One example I had was I bought a lawnmower back years ago, about 20 years ago, because my dad was about 80. And I didn't want him mowing the grass when I was away at my shift work for 3 or 4 days at a time. So it was a Kubota commercial, bought it used, probably paid $3,400 for it or something. Anyway, I had it down here when I moved down here, and I took it up there so that somebody from the church could go and cut his grass. Yeah, and put the biggest chain they had at Home Depot. And the next day he called and said somebody cut the chain and stole your mower. You know, to replace that mower today is probably a $10,000 mower. You know. So, and it's just gone. Boom, gone. And somebody hooked up my in broad daylight, you know. And like you were saying, eventually after, you know, my dad down here, we had to auction off that property because of the technicality. I couldn't separate the two. And so we had to auction it off. And then we were just walking along picking up the bargains. And chairs. And you just see all that. It's like your childhood is like just going away into other people's hands. It's like and you know, when you're a kid, I remember saying, "Oh, I want a car when I grow up," and this. And as you get older, those things start to lose their value. And now it's like I wouldn't pay that much for a car if I had $1 billion. Because it's just like metal and plastic and rubber, and it's going to deteriorate and require maintenance. And so, as we change, we start seeing things more the way Christ did. I just wish I could do it a lot more.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Thank you, Randy. John? We'll have to move on after John.
About a decade ago, we had to install a display at a kind of a high-end car auction. And I saw two types of people there. There were the people who bought really expensive cars, and there was one in particular, there was a high-end Bugatti that this guy was trying to get his money out of it, and he was hoping to get 1.3 mil, and it was an auction. He ended up losing $300,000 or $400,000 on it. But the guys who were happy were the guys who, and it goes back to a New Testament scripture that says, live a quiet life and work with your hands. And the guys who were happy were the guys who went to the junkyard looking for your car and went, I could work with that. And they took those cars and they restored them back to their original condition, and they took them to those car auctions, and they just sat back with the people who could write checks. And the people who were writing checks weren't real happy. There were 2 days they were happy in their life. One where they bought it,
One when they sold it?
and then this, and if they got $1 back. But the guys who were truly happy were the ones who put it back together, and they had every day was a joy for them to work on it.
Yep, good point. Auctioneer was probably happy too. Matthew 16:24 says this, Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father and with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. So another reason why we shouldn't focus so much of our attention and resources on earthly blessings is that in relation or comparison to spiritual or heavenly blessings, they're pretty much worthless, right? They're not valuable at all. We put value on them here because other people put value on them, but in reality, there's no value to them whatsoever. And again, we're not saying don't prepare for your future, don't save up money, anything like that, but don't put the emphasis on that to the neglect of your spiritual money. 1 Corinthians 9:24 says, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. So it shows the difference. The value is different. So people put a lot of time, as Bobby was pointing out, to get earthly medals, right? The amount of time and energy that goes into winning an Olympic gold medal is just, it can't even be measured in our life. I mean, we're just like, this is, how would anybody spend that much time on something? And they do it, and those things, sometimes you even find those gold medals up for auction. You know, somebody goes broke and they put it up for auction, things of that nature. It's not something that lasts. We are competing for an imperishable crown. The value is different. So not only does how long they last is different, earthly treasures only last at the most a lifetime. Earthly treasures have no value whatsoever in the long term. First Peter chapter 1 verse 17 says, "Now if you call on the Father who without partiality judges according to each one's work, conduct yourself throughout the time of your stay here in fear, knowing that you are not redeemed with corruptible things, like gold or silver from your aimless conduct received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot." So, nothing wrong with having physical possessions, nothing wrong with enjoying your physical possessions, but when you start putting the emphasis on your physical possessions instead of your spiritual possessions, then you're ruining your life is what you're doing. You're buying into something that is not real. You're putting emphasis on stuff that's not going to last and that's not valuable long term. A little joke that somebody told, or an analogy somebody gave at one point, talking about this guy wanted to take his most valuable possession to heaven with him, and so he was allowed to take whatever he could fit in a suitcase. And so he put gold bars in the suitcase. I'm taking these gold bars to heaven with me. They're so valuable. And he gets to heaven, they're like, why did you bring asphalt to heaven? You know, the roads are paved with gold, and that's what you thought you could bring to heaven? That's not even valuable at all. And so I think we get a good example of that. So let's go to question number 2. And that is, give examples of people who have laid up treasures on earth only to be disappointed, maybe not using ourselves as our example now. We've already done that. Does the name Sam Bankman-Fried mean anything to anybody? Huh? I mean, the guy lost $15 billion in one day, right? And how many people who thought that they were going to have all this money one day and they were just going to buy a little bit of stuff here and they were going to support this particular guy and his company and they were going to be rich. They're getting into something and they lost all of it. I can't even imagine waking up and losing all that money. You can, many athletes like Tom Brady lost a ton of money on that. A lot of other people have lost money on things like the Enron scandal. Bernie Madoff, just instantly lose your money. Even maybe less scandalous, but just equally real, stock market crashes like of 1929. How many people lost billions or millions of dollars then, probably equivalent of billions of dollars today, just overnight? They thought they had something of value, something that was going to last forever, and they did not have that. What about the rich young ruler? Right, we got a couple up here. You know, he comes to Jesus, wants to follow him. What I need to do to have eternal life? Jesus tells him, keep the commands. He said, I've kept all the commands. What do I lack? Go sell everything you have and give it to the poor and come follow after me. And he says, no way. I have something more valuable here. I'm rich. And I guarantee you that guy regretted that decision. Brian?
Yeah, another biblical example is the rich fool. You know, he saves all the grain silos up, and he's excited for the future, and then he dies. Another example, this is fictional, of course, but there was a movie called Richie Rich. I really enjoyed watching as a kid. Macaulay Culkin, you know, it's classic. But the message there was he was super rich, and he had everything. He had a McDonald's in his house. I mean, it was incredible. Anything he wanted, a go-kart track, all that, but he had no friends. And even though that's fictional in the movie, I think that's the case for a lot of rich people today. Maybe because they've had to burn so many bridges on their way to the top, that now that they're at the top, they're lonely and they don't have any meaningful relationships. And that's the saddest, most tragic thing, that the rich is actually the most poor of all.
Yeah, absolutely. That can definitely happen. And I guarantee you the guy who just lost that $16 billion will not have very many people show up to the next party he's throwing. You have also the rich man and the rich man Lazarus example Jesus gives. I mean, talk about a guy that really regretted it, right? We have the outcome of that. He goes, please send somebody to my brother so they don't end up in this terrible fate that I'm in. And he's told, man, you were living large. You had everything, right? And now Lazarus wasn't. And now he's blessed, and you're the one that's suffering because of your treasures.
I sort of thought about Solomon because he had virtually everything. And I was looking at, Matthew, just a little bit past here, Matthew 6:29, where in all of his glory. He was nothing like, it says, yet I say to you, not even Solomon in all of his glory was, clothed like him. So in other words, all he had, it's gone. He's gone. And it can't even speak even close to, what he's talking about here. And it's just, it just echoes what we talked about before. But Solomon was somebody that came to mind.
I have Solomon down on my list. You have this idea where he finally comes to realize all this, right? He goes, I'm saving all this money up, and who knows, I might give it to my son, and he's going to blow it in a short period of time. How many times have we seen that happen in the world, right? Where a guy has built a huge mass empire, he gives it to his children, and next thing you know, it's just a generation, and they're all broke. And so you have to be careful about that. I was reading about a guy who was the richest man in Ireland. In 2008, he had an estimated net worth of $6 billion. In 2008, when the stock markets crashed, he ended up owing $3 billion. Going from a positive $8 billion to a negative of $3 billion in just a short period of time. All right, who has the microphone over here? Stuart?
One of the things that keeps coming into mind is like somebody that really is coveting their treasure, their accomplishments, or really was Mike Tyson back in the 80s.
Yes.
I mean, he was on top of the world. He walked into the ring, with a confidence that he could not be beaten. And basically a person that was nowhere near in his league, knocked him out. And one of the contributing factors was that, he was so confident in his own ability that he didn't train properly. He didn't, have the cornermen that he usually had to do it. And he got beaten. And ever since then, through the rest of his career, he was struggling to be anything, and lost all of his money, and it's just
$400 million.
$400 million.
He made fighting, and he filed bankruptcy. And when he filed bankruptcy in 2003, he owed $23 million. So he made $400 million in his life. And the stories go that he would go to buy a Porsche in one place, go to the next dealership and trade it in, or he was just ridiculous with his money. He thought all these things. And so what I mentioned in the prayer, these are principles that we need that will make our eternity a lot better. But if we live by them, God is so gracious to us, it'll make our here and now much better too. I think we need to remember that. All right, Herb, and then we'll go to the next one.
I was thinking of Alexander the Great. He was king by the time when he turned 20, he became king. He was dead 13 years later at 33, having conquered much of the civilized world then. And he spent all that time fighting and had this thirst for power and greed or whatever it was, and didn't even live it's such a sad story of his life.
I mean, you could look at Elvis Presley, you could look at some of those other stars that had everything at a young age and didn't live to be past 45 years old, right? They just spent all the time in it. So the next question there is, why should we lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven? And how do we lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven? I think that's an important question for us to consider. Now, it says, where your treasures are, there your heart will be. I think we sort of think the opposite, and the opposite is also true. We learned that from Colossians, but here it says, if you make it an effort to place your valuables in heaven, then that's where your heart's going to end up. So tell us why that's important and how we do that. Randy has one. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think Adam gave us a great idea in that focusing on heaven daily, because it's just like, I worked with court-ordered kids, and I would tell them, if you think about something long enough, you'll do it. And sometimes they'd say, you're exactly right. And next thing I knew, I was arrested or whatever. And this is something I know I struggle with, is remembering to think about how great heaven will be. It's just beyond our imagination, and that's why it's hard to think about it. But if we think about it enough, we start seeing this world as dark, dingy place. It's not the way God wanted it to be. He makes it so it's tolerable, and He helps us get through this life to go to heaven. and he gives us what we need, but it's not anything like it was supposed to be. It's not the Garden of Eden anymore. We know that. And if we can start seeing heaven as the beautiful place that it is, we'll start to realize and start to let go of this world.
Okay, so how is to focus more of our time and attention on heaven and after we die, and that will let us get our mind away from the physical earth that we sometimes put our value in. Nothing can devalue or destroy our treasures in heaven. Right? There's no inflation. Nothing destroys the worth of our money, our value that we put there. They are way more valuable than earthly treasures. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, the one thing that I thought about, one of my whys is these treasures will not come back to bite you. They will only lift you up, encourage you,
Right.
and push you through and help you get through. And I think another thing is, how do you do that? Share those treasures.
Okay.
I mean, the delight in seeing other people, like Sam. I mean, he's a Christian, and I mean, there was a sharing. I didn't personally do it, but when you share those with other people and it helps them out, I think that also is a way to do that.
Okay. To share the gospel with other people, so they can
those
be.
treasures. It may be just a card or whatever, but share that goodness that Christ has already shared with you.
And I think sharing our physical possessions to remind ourselves that that's what they're made for. They're made they can't take them with you, so you should share them while you're on this earth as well. Turn to Colossians chapter 3, and then we'll let Brian give his comment. Colossians chapter 3. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so for why, I mean, obviously it's the greatest return on investment that there is. You're going to be with God forever. And how you do that. I was going to say what Joe said about sharing your treasures. Maybe a helpful way for me to think about it is like instead of an IRA, it's an ERA, it's an eternal retirement account. Like every time I give somebody money, give money to the poor, or support somebody in need, it's like I'm depositing that money into the heavenly bank account. And the hard thing about that is when you put it in your earthly bank account, you see it. It's in your account. But with a heavenly bank account, you don't see it anymore. That money's gone. But the reward comes later. The return on investment is something way off in the future.
And it takes faith to know that it's there. I worked for some doctors when I was in college. One of the doctors I'd always go over, and he would have me sit down across the desk from him while he was reading everybody's heart. And I was like, what are you doing? You're supposed to be focused on that. He'll have these discussions with me. And one thing he told me one time, his dad had to return all their Christmas presents because the neighbor's house burnt down. And he went and got all the money from the Christmas presents and went and bought food for the neighbors. And he took all his kids down there, gave the groceries to the neighbors, and told the kids, the only thing you can take with you is what you give away. And so that, years later, when his son's now a doctor, he remembered that, and he was willing to be that kind of a person. Colossians chapter 3, it says, if you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things of the earth. For you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Read the rest of that chapter, and you'll see the things that we're to give away, the earthly stuff that we're to give away, and the spiritual stuff that we're supposed to keep. Hebrews chapter 10, in verse 32 says this, but recall the former days in which after you were illuminated, you endured a great struggle with suffering, partly while you were made a spectacle by reproaches and tribulations, and partly while you became companions of those who were so treated. For you had compassion on me in my chains, and joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods, knowing that you have a better and an enduring possession for yourself in heaven. Therefore do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward. For you need to have endurance, so that after you have done this, the will of God, you may receive the promise. So it's this idea, when you willfully suffered on my behalf, what you were doing is you were building up a treasure in heaven, not an earthly treasure. And you could take the plundering of your earthly materials gladly, because you knew that what you were doing had a spiritual reward, and you had faith in that was going to be the promise. All right, who else has a microphone? Anybody? All right, so a couple other things. I think how we do it, living the principles in this sermon. Just go back and keep reading this over and over and over again. And if you live the principles in this sermon, those are treasures in heaven. Yeah, that's what you're doing. You're putting your treasures in heaven. Matthew chapter 25. I was hungry and you gave me drink. I was thirsty, food and I was thirsty and you gave me drink. Serving other people, giving up things for other people is giving rid of physical possessions in order to have heavenly possessions. So I think our mindset needs to be turned toward that. So question number 4 then is, what in the world does Matthew 6, 22 through 23 mean? Let's look at that real quick. It says, the lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, the whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? You guys come up with anything on that? Does you look at that and say, man, is this not a place? But remember, one of the things that you always want to consider when you are looking at Scripture is the context. So does this fit in the context of the lesson that we're talking about here? I think it does. Because this word, good, is anybody have a different translation in their Bible than good? The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good. You don't have to have a microphone for this. Just shout it out. I'll repeat it. Clear. Okay. Clear. Anything else? Healthy. All right. Had a couple healthies. Anybody have an old King James version? As Herb laughs about that. You're going to offend somebody. Now nobody's going to raise their hand, Herb, because they're having an old King James. Herb laughed at me because they had old King James. Single. And I think that is really in context, and that is maybe the best translation of the word, focused, single. Because if your eye is focused or have single vision, just like where you put your treasures, just like when you're praying to have one person hear you, and that's God. When your earthly treasures are in heaven, there's only one good place for those. So I think that's where he is in this. He's talking about, if you have a focus, if your eye is in focus on spiritual things, then your body, your spiritual, everything's going to make sense, right? Everything's going to come into focus for you. Everything's going to be clear. If you have a focused vision, everything else is going to fall into place. And it just really goes aligned with everything else he's talked about in this particular section. So I think that's the true meaning of this particular passage. Now, as the Pharisees, what happens if I think I have a single focus and my single focus is wrong? How great is that darkness, right? The Pharisees thought they had everything. They figured it all out. And Jesus is saying, the Pharisees have no idea what they're doing. What if you think, treasures in earth, that's all there is, and you're so dark. The darkness, the light that is in you, if your focus is off, then everything else is wrong. And boy, is it really dark. And I think that's really the text and context of that and what that really means as we go along. So question number 5. Give examples of people trying to serve God and money. That's really what mammon is, or God and anything else. Bible examples, real life examples. I have Solomon again on this one. Who had their hand up? All right, Joe?
No, I think the one that I had was the wealth preachers, the prosperity gospel concept where people, they say some stuff that's biblically sound, but most of it, or a good portion of it, is just put money in the plate concept. So they're trying to have one foot, here and one foot there.
Okay, very good. Who else? All right, Brian has one.
Yeah, God will often in the Old Testament talk about how much he hates when business people use false measures and false scales. They'll rig the weight systems to where it looks like they're selling you more than they actually are, or rig it the opposite way. And it's like God sees right through that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the Bible's filled of saying, be honest in business. Boy, what would they say about all those people that run those fair booths, or the where the rims are crooked, you're going to make it, you're not, it's just stacked against you. Herb?
For my generation, maybe people don't know them anymore, but Tammy Faye Baker and her husband. Oh, that was just a sad situation. And I mean, that's, to me, when you said God and mammon in this question, it was like, wow, that was. And then the former president of Liberty College that recently had some, it's sad.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird when you go looking at these lists of the richest preachers in the world, and you start like, this guy has $500 million. I mean, that's probably not what God intended. And you're working for him, that you're going to have quite that much money. The Pharisees, I'll get to you next, Randy. I want to point this out. In Luke 16, I think the Pharisees fit right into this category. They wanted spiritual blessings. They wanted to be spiritual, make people think they were spiritual, but yet they held on to that money aspect of it. And there's a phrase there in verse 14 of Luke 16. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, also heard all these things, and they derided him. So they were just known for loving money, the Pharisees were. And yet they wanted to hold on to their spiritual influence, but the whole time, what was the most important thing to them was the money. And they held on to that even tighter. Randy?
Yeah, I was just thinking of, for example, the politicians who have inside information about somebody's going to be indicted, it's going to cause a company to crash or whatever, and they sell the stock. That's, you know, you and I do it, we go to prison. But they're supposed to be serving our best interests, and what do? When they do that, the other investors lose. They're actually hurting people rather than helping people. And
I think that's a good example of putting up treasures on earth and really ripping people off and taking advantage of things. I'm not sure how much of their treasures are in heaven, though. I'm not sure there's a divided loyalty sometimes. With Solomon, he had the divided loyalty. As a matter of fact, he started worshiping idols. His wives, after a certain time, divided his loyalty. It wasn't that he gave up worshiping God. It just he thought he could worship God and worship these idols. And there's a big X to that, right? God says, no way. You cannot worship me and have these idols.
I think there are conspicuous examples like we've looked at. I think there's some more subtle ones. If I'm honest with myself, I can look back in times in my life where I didn't make a particular choice to do it, but I found myself serving God and mammon. I mean, you can be serving God and mammon creeps in. And Satan does it in such a way to justify it, rationalize it. And you have to be careful with that.
Yeah, good point, Dave. Sometimes we do what I said at the very beginning and what we all have to do. And Dave's giving us this good reminder. We look at other examples of people, but let's not forget looking at ourselves. Because as Dave pointed out, it can very easily creep in to every single one of us, regardless of how much money we make or how much things we have. This idea of putting the emphasis on physical things instead of spiritual things can creep in. Achan is another great example. Go ahead.
We spent the day yesterday, my family members and I, to the Renninger.
It goes in and out.
Okay. It's like 1,500 vendors of people. It's selling old stuff. And in a way, it's a little bit, has like a graveyard mentality because, you know, this stuff has come from decades past. And when we were talking about mammon, I was like, I saw a bunch of bankers stuff there. This one guy has like scales. He has banking. I didn't even know what some of that stuff did. You know, old counting machines and things like that. I was like, well, that's a bygone era. And then there's also people there who actually sell old money that's like not any longer in circulation or whatever. Right. There's people of every kind there. They're living off the fact that you died and you left this, and then now they're going to see what they can, you know, pilfer out of the, you know, the remains of your life. And it's just endless amount of that. You know, finery, furniture. You're talking about furniture. The most ornate things from 100 years ago, and all I could do is walk around and go, well, I know what I'm interested in looking at and being, you know, I might deal with a little bit, but this is a huge example of the wealth of our country, the materialism that we enjoy, but also the quickness.
Yeah, and it's good for us to all keep in mind that that's going to happen to us, okay? One day, our kids are going to be walking through our stuff, and they're not going to want it. And somebody who has no connection to us is going to walk through our house and say, I'll give you pennies on the dollar for that, and I'll give you pennies on the dollar for that. And our kids are going to say, sold. Okay? So maybe that'll teach us a lesson and what we value and what we don't value. All right, Stephen?
I think of Nebuchadnezzar in this. God is intent on, it seems, winning his heart when he is so thoroughly determined to defy him. The first four, I think, aside from God, of course, Nebuchadnezzar is the real center of the story of the first four chapters of Daniel to me, because God is using Daniel and his friends to focus on this most powerful man, this man who has everything. He is number one on the planet at this time. We have no records of anyone coming close to him in his lifetime. And God is determined to show, I am more powerful than you. You will serve me. And that is just an incredible struggle to watch through those chapters.
Yeah, same thing with Pharaoh. We're going to bring the bell in just a second. We're going to give Cindy a chance. All right, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm seeing a checklist. I call them checklist Christians, where they have a list of things that they have to check off to make sure that they're following God. And to me, that checklist is the mammon or the world. They're wanting the world to see them as they want to be, kind of like the Pharisees. But they're so focused on making sure that that point is checked off their list, that they've accomplished it, that their eyes are no longer on God, they're on that list.
And that's why this lesson is so important. The Sermon on the Mount is so valuable. We cannot study it enough. In your personal life, I would encourage you to read it monthly, study it in depth yearly, because it will change your life if you really apply that. And not just, it's the heart that God is after. Thank you, everybody. Questions are in the back for Wednesday.